Ah, hello and welcome to episode number 21. Got me apples, have to have them, don't I? This stuff here is the cabling which sits underneath the RT and it runs from the batteries to the front of the bus. And I'm very grateful to my colleagues at work for making up the terminals at the end there. So that's a little job I've got to do. I've also got to continue with the other wiring as well, the stuff in the cab. A bit disappointed this week because I was hoping to spray the interior of the cab with a black paint. But unfortunately, Williamson's, who are supplying the paint for me, they've got some additional colours to do for other stuff for me. And that won't now be delivered until next week. So that's a job for next week, sadly. But there's still lots and lots and lots of jobs that I need to be getting on with, although I had planned to do that this weekend because then everything else, like putting the wiring back in the cab, all falls off the back of that because I can't put that conduit back in until I've at least done the ceiling. Now, I did identify last week, and it's something that's a bit like a duh moment that I hadn't noticed. I've got to put some brown in there as well because where the conduit goes back, it's better to do it now than later. So I've got a little strip of brown that needs to go into the cab before we do all the rest of the brown. So at least it's done and it sort of hides up around the back of the conduit. Yeah, last week I managed to get some paint on the wheel arches, use some chassis black. This week I'm going to put some undersill. I've got some undersill in can form, so I'm going to spray that under there. They did originally have undersill on them. They weren't painted neatly black using chassis paint, but what I've done is I put the chassis paint on there to act as a kind of base. I've removed last week all of the flaky stuff that was under there. And now obviously I'm at the position where, having put the black on, we can now put the undersill on. So this weekend is really going to be mainly concentrated on me putting that wiring loom back together again. So probably a nice little clean job this weekend. Anyway, thanks very much. Sit back, enjoy. I'm going to spend 24 hours up here this weekend, maybe less, but we'll see how we get on. Thanks very much.
You may recall last week I cut all those little wires as part of the wiring loom. Well, here I am with all those little wires all neatly cut, labelled up, and about to start creating the loom. Now, the first thing I've tackled here is the switch panel. So each wire goes into its relevant spot. At the back there, you can see I've got the master diagram, which is, well, I've had it for a while actually, but I've labelled up each wire on the master diagram, and then that relates to each wire that I'm now putting in here. The little A4 sheet down the bottom is my chart as to where each cable goes. So on the big one, obviously, you've got each cable coming into whatever relevant point there is. And then the little one down the bottom tells me, without having to go through the whole damn thing, exactly where it goes to. So anyway, they've got to be right. They've got to be put in the correct place, because otherwise they won't relate to the switch that it's connected to. So anyway, that was a nice little easy job. Now, I tried doing this on a wire-by-wire basis years ago with this RT, and what happens is it just jams in the conduit, because the wires, if you have a look there, you've got quite a mass and they're all neatly sort of curled up, but you try pulling those through on a one-by-one basis, on a sort of wire-by-wire, so as each old wire comes out, the new one follows it in. Unfortunately, it doesn't work, and what you end up with is a big mass of wires all tangled up inside the conduit. So although this was a bit of a bold way of doing it, nonetheless, I think it worked quite well. Right, sticking with wiring, you may remember last week I mentioned about the speedo just being a giant voltmeter. Here's proof that it is. That's a 1.5 volt battery, which gives you, what, about 14 mile an hour on the speedo? So that's all it is. It's just a little voltmeter. I did try with a higher voltage, and I got it to go right off the clock. This was actually in the RT and functional, it wasn't very functional. It used to keep getting stuck at whatever random speed it wanted to do. But nonetheless, it's been several years before it's actually seen any speed. So this is probably about the first time. A little experiment for you. Okay, let's stop messing about and see how we got on with making the wiring loom.
Right, here we are. The wiring loom, pretty much almost completed. These wires are the ones that run towards the back of the bus from the cab. As you can see, there's a fair few of them. These ones are, I think there's a heater one, so heater supply and bell pull there. That's towards the back platform, and one for the back lamp just over the platform. Then we move up the wires, it gets slightly thicker. We have this one here on the floor to the right hand side. That's a draw wire because I've got wiring already in place, so I need to draw that back through the conduit. Then we get a bit of a spur, a bit of a branch junction there. So the ones that come from the back, which I've just run through, obviously they're the ones that go through the saloon. These ones that branch off to the left, they're the ones for the indicators, the interrupter unit and the bell. They also will have a draw wire as well because they need to go through conduit around the back of the bulkhead. We then go into the first part of the conduit. That's the one that sits behind the driver's head, that bit there. All right, and then we go into this little junction box just there. You will know that there's quite a lot of slack in this at the moment. So when it all goes back together again, hopefully I shall pull the wires back through the conduit so that there's no slack in them. Then we get to the main unit with all the fuses and the switches and everything on it. Now that is now complete with all the relevant wires in place. Once again, I shall take some of the slack off of that. If we just go back again, right, we've got this junction here off to the right hand side. That one runs down the side of the cab pillar. So where you've got, if you look to the left of the driver, there's a pillar there. There's actually two of these conduits. What I've managed to do is I've managed to get this conduit to take most of the new wiring that I've put in. So I've packed that quite full. The other one will then be used for the ones that I need to draw through. So that'll be the starter one, the main cable for the feeding the switchboard. So that one is currently vacant, and I'll put that in later on. And then we've got this one here, which spurs off down the side of the driver's cab, and the horn push and the dip switch sits there. And then the wires continue on all the way around to the front of the bus. There we go. And these ones are the indicator goes up into the turret, and a supply for the dashboard. There are some other ones that do need to be pulled through. So like the speedo cable that I had so many problems with the other day, that one does need to be pulled through. So anyway, there we are. So that's part of the loom. There you go. It's good to see that stage finished now. Right, here goes. This is one of the minor problems that I encountered when doing this wiring. Now, assuming this rather heavy piece of beading, well, sort of, is the cable, all right, and you've got an appliance there or a connection there and a connection there. So the obvious thing to do would be to cut the wire with a little bit of excess because we never quite get it right, do we? So that is how I did most of the wiring. But then when I came to do the wiring that goes through the bus, that posed a bit more of a problem because I then had to balance this so that it didn't end up with the whole thing all over here or the whole thing all over there. And then obviously it doesn't make the connection. So that was a bit of fun. That took more time than I planned yesterday. So anyway, that was a small problem, as well as my little tags dropping off the end of the wires because they weren't really suitable for putting through the conduit. But luckily I've used different colours, as you may have noticed, so I can actually trace those back now. At least I hope I can. Right, so that is probably almost a wrap on the wiring, unless I find something else to talk about.
I did, I found this, more cables. Okay, you may remember when I turned up at the barn, I was carrying these rather large wires. There we go. These are the wires that run from the battery area at the back of the bus to the front of the bus and power the starter motor. And they all end up in this little area here. The one's the starter motor on the other side. So now I'm trying to refit the wires. I do know that the positive sits at the top and the negative sits at the bottom, so I know what I'm doing here. However, I then noticed when I did this replay, I noticed this bit of exposed wire. That's the original wire that came with the bus. So I'm going to, now I've seen it, I'm going to take that back off next weekend, and I'm going to put some heat shrink. If you have a look at the bigger cables on the right hand side, they've got heat shrink on them. So there you can see it, look quite closely. And there's quite a lot of that on an RT. I'm surprised really it just burst into flames, but there we go. So anyway, the bottom wire is, we can just about see it, just hidden by the positive there, is the negative, and then the positive sits up the top, and you can see those terminals. Now the lower voltage terminals, the two which go off to the driver's cab and supply all the stuff like the destination lights, the wiper, so everything in the cab runs off those two smaller wires you see at the bottom there. The piece of conduit just above my fingers is the one that curls round into the bus, and it goes up the side of the driver's cab. So anyway, as you can see, I've cleaned that terminal up as well. My colleague did quite a good job of welding them on, the new terminals, onto the bit of wire. But anyway, you may notice just down the bottom there, although it's not perfectly visible, it's highlighted now, that was the pipe that gave me all that trouble. Do you remember that cable? So what I've done is, there's two separate cables in there, and I've taken the exposed section of it and I've put this protective plastic sheeting around it. I've also done the same. You can also see the other one that's screwed onto that wooden board. That's the saloon heaters. So there's quite a lot of stuff here, and it's made a lot easier actually since I took the inner wing out. More on the inner wing later on. Right, having joined the negative wire to the other end, now what I've got to do is to push it through this conduit. This was a bit of a, shall I swear, sod actually, this conduit, because about a third of it had completely rotted out, so we're getting some new conduit section made. It twists around a little bit. But anyway, sod's law that I'm going to have the same blooming problem again. Look, it's got jammed. And the reason it got jammed is just there in the centre of screen. That's the other end of the conduit. And it got stuck there. So, notice the red wire has now joined it. So the best way to do it was to clamber under the bars and in sort of semi-darkness, because this is right above the chassis and there's a space there. You can't get your hand properly. So all you can really do is get a couple of fingers. And what I'm going to try and do is to get it to go through a gap which is just below the saloon floor and just above the chassis. So there's a lot of little jobs like this that frankly you do by fingers, and I find it a bit creepy climbing under the bus on my own, because I was on my own on this day. So I really don't enjoy being under there, to be honest with you, but has to be done. Anyway, fiddling around, it's a job that you need two people, because I really needed someone to push and then me to try and feed the cable through. So as soon as I was on my own, I've got to just try and feel it through. But I take my hat off to engineers who are doing this all day long. You'll probably learn a lot of shortcuts, but I finally managed to get it to work, as you will see in a second. So here's both wires. You notice that patch of mucky stuff on the floor down there, apart from the dirt obviously. That is WD-40, because what I did was I sprayed the inside of the pipe with WD to try and make it slip up easy, because there's still a bit of rust in there and it sort of grabs the wire. What I learned was to do both the wires at once, but they are heavy, really heavy cable. My colleague at work actually said to me, he said, will they actually fit in that conduit? I don't think they'll go. But anyway, proof to Darren, yeah, they do. Look, they work perfectly, and the one that we're making is a little bit bigger than that, so that should work. So that was left piled up halfway down the bus. So time to get the paintbrush out. All of that wiring has made me want to get on with this now. Right, this is a underbody seal. I know it don't look very nice, but actually it dried really quite nicely. You can see there I've sprayed the underneath with chassis black. There isn't a lot you can do with those wheel arches, to be honest with you. You can't restore them to perfect condition, because one, they're really, I think they might be stainless steel or something. You can't knock dents out of them. But all those dents are as a result of debris being thrown up from the rear wheels. So anyway, this is a proper underbody seal, and it looks brown initially, but it does, I think that's probably the effect of the light, but it does change colour. So anyway, having done that, remember all that fuss we had with that stuck wire, and I ended up having to take off this offside wheel arch. Actually, it made access to those wires, if you've just seen, a real loads easier. But anyway, the thing came off and it was really grubby, so I had to scrape off all this muck. Nonetheless, I think the result eventually weren't too bad. So the first thing I needed to do, having cleaned it all off, was to apply some of this. This is a hammerite, silver hammerite, and it's really good because it's supposed to stop rust. I don't know, well, I've proved it yet, but anyway, it's supposed to stop rust, but it's also a really heavy paint, which means that applied by brush, it covers almost everything. Now, I accept in this shot, it doesn't look very nice, but it does come up quite well, as you will see in a second. So there you go. What do you think? That's the inner wheel arch. The little piece of metalwork at the bottom there, that's the leading, would you say? Yes, the leading offside flap from that wheel arch you saw me schultzing just now. So that's that bit. The paper on the side there, you'll notice that's to cover the rubber, because that's there's like a sort of a rubber strip there. So the whole idea of that, it's a mud flap strip. But anyway, yes, sorry about that. Yeah, so I'd covered that up during the spraying process, and now I have to get my pot of paint out and make it look pretty as well. That's a really old can of Dunlop tyre black. It says on there, makes tyres look like brand new, so it says anyway. But yeah, it's quite good little stuff actually. It covers really well. It was though really heavy paint, and as you can see, it's not covered too badly actually. There's a few bits of that pink showing through, so it needed a second coat, which I came along and did a little bit later once it had dried off. But anyway, that's coat number 1 done. Time now, I think, to have a look at that door. Do you remember that door from a little while back? I've tended to be sort of batching little jobs. Now, I had intended, this bit here, you can see, is just about covered with that masking tape. The purpose of that was obviously to stop the brown being sprayed all over this piece of rubber. It's a little flap, sits at the bottom of the driver's door. No idea why it was there. Maybe just to lubricate the driver's signalling window mechanism. But anyway, it was there, and as you can see, it's a rubber piece of rubber. So by the magic of whatever, I wander around the yard, get that same pot of matte black paint back again, and off we go. So I've masked it up, and basically I don't want that stuff going all over my nice clean paintwork. So this is a rubbishy old brush that I've had for years. I clean all my brushes. I'm quite fastidious. I know this one has had a hard life actually, because it's done all the horrible jobs, but my decent brushes will go nowhere near this matte black tyre paint, to be quite honest with you. But anyway, that is just finishing that off. So like I said earlier on, I tend to batch things up. So I'm going to do a load of brown, I'm going to do a load of sort of whatever, black or whatever. So all of those bits there you can see on the side of the door. The black was done separately, the brown was done separately, the green was done separately, so each bit's done separately, and I'll batch it all up and do a load of bits all the same colour. It saves sort of cleaning the gun out every 5 minutes. So there we are. So that's that bit, and I think that had a second coat before I went home, and that's almost finished. The only thing that I do need is the rubber strip that sits on there. If you look towards us, you see that line of screws and that little piece of metal. That's exactly the same as a Route Master, so I've got one of them on order through a friend of mine. Baines are the people that supply most of the rubber for RTs, RMs and stuff like that, but the little bits and pieces like this, they've stopped stocking really, because nobody really contacts them for that. So anyway, the very last thing, having talked about batching colours of paint, is to get the spray gun out and attack the bus with some brown paint. Right, before anyone says, I know this looks absolutely abysmal. The problem is, I actually, as you can see, I've done some rubbing down in there, and I'd use wet and dry, and when it dries out, you get this residue, so it needs to be washed off again. But I had to attack it with the sanding paper again, because that little area just there. Oh, I'll tell you what, before we just go to that, can you see those wires? They're the wires that come up from underneath the bus that I was showing you earlier on. There's 5 there. The 2 speedo cables, the positive and negative for the main unit at the top, and then one of the wires is for the cab heater. So anyway, back to the plot. That gully where that top of that conduit finishes has one of those larger conduits you saw earlier on. So what I've done is I've gone back into the cab, tidied this up a bit, because this wasn't intended. I didn't intend to do any of this at this stage. I want to do the cab ceiling, and all the detritus that, you know, when you're rubbing down the cab ceiling will end up here, basically at the bottom of the bus. So start at the top, work your way down, and you get a decent job. Start at the bottom, work your way up, and you ruin what you've just done. So anyway, plan of action was to stick some brown on that. So out comes the spray gun, and la, here we are. A line of brown paint. Now that brown, when you look at it, it's completely different to the brown that was below, which is really odd. So according to Williamson's, who have very kindly made the paint for me, they contacted London Transport Museum, and they said this is the colour. It's this light brown, not this dark brown that I'd got in the cab. So anyway, hey ho, a little lesson there. Right, so not to be outdone, here is the inner wing. This sits, it's upside down actually in this shot, but this sits obviously inside the driver's cab. It's one single piece of aluminium. The other side is the green colour, and this is the brown. So that's the brown that you'll see inside the cab. All of that area at the front, those little finials, the circular thing you see there, that's the other side of the side light. None of that is actually seen. It's all pretty much hidden. You'd be really pushed to see that. But what I've done is I've sprayed it all brown to make it look tidy. The bit that's covered up with a rather odd looking masking paper, that's actually black. So I've sprayed that black already, and the opposite side I've sprayed in green. So anyway, oh, that little thing at the bottom there, you see that little squiggly thing, looks like an S shape. That's the conduit from inside the cab. That's what I made the other day, and my colleague at work, I could just see that little knuckle there. He welded that on for me, so and then I brought it up here today. So while I've got the brown spray, the brown paint and the spray gun out, I might as well get that done. So hey, listen, a good weekend, I think. Quite satisfying this time round. So thank you very much for watching. Hopefully a little bit more progress next week.